hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestel.
And this is the show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 198.
Ooh.
And we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm all right. I have survived an encounter with the Cooey cyclist, but it is just another strange day here in rainy Sheffield, wondering what the hell people are taking at 1 a.m. in the morning.
I was going to say, yeah, on our Patreon live stream yesterday, we got to hear about your actual use of angry karate. It was very impressive. You'll have to listen to the Patreon live stream to really get to know what that means. But let me tell you, folks, you do not want to cross Paul Damien Bestel.
It's just, it's living here, it's layers, isn't it? Layers on layers.
That's it. Yeah. It can't all be mushy peas and fancy beer halls. There's got to be a few crackheads.
Yeah, 2 badgers running down the street the other day like they'd done a robbery.
That's profiling, Paul. That's what that is. Well, for me, I'm very excited. This is a very special episode of Ghost Story Guys. And that is because I have alluded a number of times to a new podcast that I've been working on with today's guest, Brandon Snyder, host of Southern Gothic. And today we are finally actually talking about it on the public feed. So I am very, very happy to welcome, as I mentioned, Brandon Snyder, host of Southern Gothic and co-creator of the new Fear Daily fiction podcast with me. Brandon, welcome to the Ghost Story Guys.
Look, I'm just going to start this off by saying, Brennan and I have been working on this show since January and have obviously been talking a lot. In the last couple months, every Thursday in the late afternoon, I start to get a little depressed because I know you're hanging out with Paul without me, and I'm getting jealous and getting FOMO because, you're like back with your old girlfriend. I'm the side host. And, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, he's yours. Yeah.
This all got very weird very fast. Also, don't send me emails about how polyamory works. I know. We just like to make jokes on this show.
Sometimes humor doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I know, right, Paul? Yeah. Oh man. But yes, Fear Daily is, again, a daily fiction podcast with original stories written by myself, narrated and sound designed by Brandon, and it is on your favorite podcatcher now. We soft launched on September 2nd, and we've just been kind of slow rolling it out, but very exciting to actually finally have it out in the world.
Oh my gosh, I am so tired, y'all. This is a daily show, and October is coming, and we have been busting our butt to get it together, and it is rolling, and it sounds cool. Really proud of it. The stories have turned out really good. The response has been really good. And we haven't, obviously we haven't really told anybody. We intentionally kind of did like a soft open and told like our Patreon and stuff and wanted more episodes to be out. So when folks found it, they could binge it. And here we are.
The response has been very cool. We actually just had a lovely comment on Spotify today, which I just saw a little bit of in the message preview. So yeah. Check out Fear Daily. However, we are not here to talk about Fear Daily, although you can bet your sweet ass we'll be talking about it a lot on this episode. We are instead here to tell the stories of the ghosts of Atlanta.
Whoa.
So, of course, we wanted to bring in a Southern expert for that one.
I forgot to tell you when you asked me, I hate Atlanta. And you can email me about that, Atlanta. I grew up in New Orleans, and Atlanta's like our arch rival. So that's really why I'm here. We're gonna go all Sherman on Atlanta and burn this down with haunted stories.
Yeah, we are going to take a Midwest swing right to its knees.
We're going to Atlanta then. Where are we going?
We've got all kinds of stuff lined up here for this episode. Of course, we're going to be talking about famed Lake Lanier. I don't think you can talk about Atlanta without bringing up Lake Lanier. But we're also going to talk about a murderous train, or potentially murderous train, and I do love a good murderous train, along with a lot of other stuff. Although there is one little bit I wanted to mention just before we shout out our patrons, and that is a nightclub I read about while researching this episode. It is called The Masquerade. And now I believe it is still there, but it's moved. And are you familiar with The Masquerade, Brandon?
So when I was in Atlanta about 6 months ago, I almost went. I was down there and I was looking at shows, and I can't remember. There was a metal band that was playing that night. And I was like, man, I could act like I'm like 20 again. And then I realized the show started at like 9:30 at night. And I was like, I'm going to skip The Masquerade tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. There's only 5 bands on the bill. It starts at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
It's absolutely. But no, it's still there. It's still hopping. I mean, that's, when you tell somebody that you are doing haunted tourism in Atlanta, that is always on the list. And if there is a show, absolutely go see it. It is. And it's not even indie bands. I mean, it's decent bands. It's, maybe slightly past their prime, better than, bands. I'm coming in hot with lots of opinions today. My apologies, y'all.
Oh, I'm saving it for the end. You're going to need to, apparently, Joyce. The people of Georgia, we do not apologize, but you can find Brandon at storyteller at southerngothicmedia.com. But The Masquerade, the current edition of it is a newer version. The original location, again, opened in 1989. I'm not sure when it closed, but I found this great account of what it was like to see shows there on a website called Southeast of Heaven. And basically, the way the bar worked is there were 3 levels to it. There was Heaven, which is the upstairs part. There was Purgatory, which was the mid-level bar, which is apparently sometimes where like the parents of kids who gone to see shows would hang out. And then there was Hell, which was more of like a kind of a DJ industrial kind of place downstairs. But apparently the floor of the place is so flimsy, or was so flimsy, that it wasn't uncommon for it to bow underneath the crowds. There was always this sense that this place is just going to collapse one day. And I've included a link to, or a picture of it in the show notes, and I'll include a link for our listeners to just get a sense of this place. And like Brandon says, whenever you talk about haunting in Atlanta, The Masquerade comes up. And of course, there was this rumor that got spread that there was a vampire who lives in the fucking building, which of course is nonsense.
Huh.
Do you remember Vampire the Masquerade?
I do.
It was like Dungeons and Dragons for vampire.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
I certainly didn't play it. Yep. We didn't sit in the basement of my friend Trap's house playing Vampire the Masquerade.
with Basement Monster.
With Basement Monster, yeah. Yeah, basically.
That's how they met.
I'd be lying if I didn't say that house was on my mind when I wrote the character of Basement Monster. That place looked like a bunker.
The Masquerade?
It was quite the spot.
Oh, no, the basement. Never mind. Duh.
The basement, yeah.
You see, Brandon's had me working too hard, so I apologize.
That's okay.
Not
It does the
sleeping
same
enough.
with me. It's all right, Brandon.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah. I'm a slave driver. But I found one employee who had posted online about his experience, and they said, I worked there during the day and some nights. I used to hang posters inside the venue. One day while hanging posters, someone tapped me on the shoulder in Heaven. Heaven, of course, being the upstairs part of the club. I paused my music, stopped moving, and slowed my breath. The tap didn't happen again, but to this day, it's a top 10 fear moment. We used to laugh all the time about the rumors about vampires, but working there during the day was actually scary. No vampires, but an annoying ghost who taps you on your shoulder and gestures for you to take out your headphones so he can hit on you.
And I tell you to smile more.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Oh boy. The world's a great place right now. Things are going well. All right. Well, before we get to the stories of Atlanta proper, we're going to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you. For real, guys, every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers, you're the ones who truly allow this show to continue. We genuinely could not continue without your support. And while we'd like to thank all our subscribers, we would especially like to thank our latest ones. They are
Whitney Bussey,
Sarah R. Getke. Hi, Sarah.
Kerry Stubbington,
Kale, or Kaylee. I'm not sure which.
Calais,
Calais. There we go. Calais. We'll just really get it wrong. Calais.
Dave Baxter.
And Lisa.
Is it Liza?
Or is it Lissay? Who's to say?
You're
Oh,
a
boy.
poet and you didn't know it.
That's it. This is going to be a wildly unfocused episode, folks. Strap in. This is going to be a good one.
Y'all just lost like $40 in patron subscribers off of that little performance there.
They knew what they were signing up for.
Once you're in, you can't get out.
It's true. It's true. We literally know where you live.
We are the podcast version of the Hotel California.
That's it. We are the ones who knock. All right, let's move on. Again, you can sign up at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Or sign up to GSD Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the Ghosts of Atlanta.
The grind. When I was a child, we lived in a most unusual haunted house. Built in the log cabin style, but larger, the house was at least 100 years old. The upstairs and downstairs had been converted into separate apartments. We lived downstairs while an elderly lady, Miss O'Kelly, lived upstairs. The house was situated on several acres in the outskirts of Atlanta, far away from the main roads. In my youth, I never understood they were ghosts, not real people like Miss O'Kelly or the man that lived in the woods. Let me explain. It was not a case where only one specially sensitive individual or clairaudient could hear the sounds. Everyone heard them. Our ghosts were toilers that worked from sunup to sundown. The matriarch of the family that we dubbed Granny was not that old by today's standards, judging from her labor. She was the first and the last to rise and go to bed, playing out the same drama endlessly that began with the morning wake-up call. Granny ascended the stairs, clapped her hands, and barked at the men, presumably her sons and husband. Get up, get up. Most of what they said sounded like gibberish, and the accent was strange. The thud of feet could be heard hitting the floor as well as their descent down the stairs. Granny could be heard in the kitchen, clacking the dishes and silverware as she prepared the morning meal. The men always exited through the side door in the kitchen to harness the snorting horses with chains to continue plowing the fields. Other sounds emanated from the house, the thump-thumping of Granny churning butter in the kitchen, and later the rhythmic foot-tapping on the floor of what we imagined to be a spinning wheel. Though no one ever saw a visual manifestation, to my knowledge, they had very definite roles that were easily recognized. The buckboard wagons creaked as the wheels turned and drowned out with distance, later returning with louder sounds as they approached the house. Throughout the day, the sounds of hammering, sawing, and other work-related noises could be heard. Upon entering a room, the noise would suddenly stop, only to start back up again the minute you left. If you entered their work area outside, the noises would also cease temporarily, only to resume as soon as you left. For that reason, I assumed they were real people that were just around the corner or in another room outside or on or about the premises working. At about this time, my grandmother became seriously ill, and we began spending weekends away from home. Upon returning, Miss O'Kelly said there was a whole gang of them downstairs just jibber-jabbering away. Our household ghosts had company with all the noises associated with a get-together of family and friends. No one could understand them, except for the morning wake-up call of, "Get up, get up." That was close enough to get up, get up. And with the accompanying sounds, there was no mistaking those words. Miss O'Kelly said when we weren't there, they'd carry on all night, and she didn't think she'd ever get any sleep and was always glad when we came back. I asked my mother what she did when we first moved in and discovered the place was haunted, to which she calmly replied, "Oh, we knew it was haunted when we moved in. The Wilsons had lived there before us, and they told us about it, but they said the ghosts wouldn't hurt you." Her only complaint had been that she thought she'd never get any sleep amidst the incessant noises that would often go on all night.
I just finished recording the audiobook for Strange 2.0 finally, and there's a bit in there, I'd forgotten about one of the stories where someone who lives in a haunted house basically said, "We don't tell babysitters that our house is haunted, because if you tell babysitters your house is haunted, you don't get babysitters. And I feel like this is a variation of that. We're like, yeah, we knew it was haunted. We just weren't going to fucking tell you. They weren't going to hurt you, so therefore it's not a problem. Sure, they're going to wake you up at 3 a.m. with their insane Catholic work ethic, but that's not our problem.
These are character building ghosts, son. You need to get up and get to work.
You know, man, when I watched The Good Place with Nick, and spoilers for The Good Place, really,
Big
genuinely,
spoiler,
if you don't want to hear how this, how it ends. Fast forward, but basically, when Eleanor is like, when she dies, and she just becomes part of everything, and kind of her personality is dissipated. I'm kind of freaked out by shit like that, like the notion of ultimate death. You know, like that's pretty freaky to me. But if the next life just involves me doing farm work from sunup to sundown, I hope I fucking dissipate immediately.
The Sisyphean struggle continues on into the afterworld. Keep rolling that rock up a hill until the end of time.
My people escaped the peasant life. I do not intend to return to it in this life or any other.
I like a ghost with a work ethic, I have to say. I think it's good to see.
I appreciate it, but it feels performative, because like Granny's churning butter. No one's eating that fucking butter. You're just trying to make us all feel bad, aren't you, Granny? I'm on to you. I had a grandmother. I know what you do. Oh, no, don't worry. I got this covered. Do you feel bad yet? Oh, Christ. All right, here I come.
The least she could do is feed you a little bit. If she's going to keep you up at night, at least like, come on, man.
Yeah. Who's making the scones for that butter?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, feed me, then criticize my weight like a good grandmother.
All the family of origin traumas are coming out today with
That's
Atlanta.
It's like Tropic Thunder. The dudes are emerging.
Okay, this story reminded me of I had to find it. There was a meme that was in your group. Somebody posted the Twitter a tweet. Can't believe that pioneer women used to churn butter for hours without even listening to a podcast about Bigfoot. Which brings me to the real reason why we're here today, to talk about Sasquatch Sunrise and not Atlanta.
Still not seen it.
You still haven't? Yeah, well, I say you don't know that you're missing anything. I kind of feel like you're missing something. It is an experience.
I can't recommend it to any friends except for the two of you. I would not recommend it to anyone. You absolutely might hate it. You might love it. You probably will feel both at the same time. It will be confusing and conflicting, and you will both curse me for telling you to watch it and not. But I would never torture any other soul with this but the two of y'all. So literally the only two people I would ever recommend this movie to.
I don't want to go through the feelings I felt after watching The Howling 2 again.
Which, I might add, Paul, is being released in a brand new 4K edition by Vinegar Syndrome. I almost ordered it for you. If I had more money right now, I would have absolutely pre-ordered that bitch for you.
I keep stumbling it on streaming, and I keep thinking, can I watch this for the first time in 25 years?
You absolutely can.
I'm not brave enough yet. I'm still trying to work up to watch Yakuza Apocalypse again, because that just scrambled my head.
Look at the cover of that. Oh my God.
Is that Howling 2?
Howling 2.
Yeah. The original title of that was Sturba.
Werewolf Butch.
Oh, I found that one. Okay, I found that cover.
Yeah. There's a great story. Well, it's not great. It's actually kind of a shitty story, but it's funny. Is it Sybil Danning in that one, Paul?
Yes, she plays Sturba.
Yeah, she plays Sturba. Yeah. So there's a scene where she tears off her shirt, and she said to the director, I will do one nude scene. One. So she tears off her shirt, and it's in the film, and okay, fine. But then the director, there's a fucking music video at the end where the beat is essentially the clip of her tearing off her shirt over and over and over. It's brutal. This is very much a get these things in writing moment.
Speaking of which, did my manager get my contract over to y'all about how many times I will take off my shirt today?
Oh boy. Well, that's a whole
double checked.
Having just watched The Substance, that joke really lands a whole other way.
Oh man, I got a ticket for tonight if I can make it.
Man alive, I saw that in a crowded theater Tuesday afternoon. I was not expecting it to be busy. It was packed.
Yeah.
And Paul, you mentioned recently when we were talking to John and Toby on the last Talk Spooky, you brought up the film Society, Brian Usna's Society. And if that film has a spiritual successor, it is The Substance. talk about some crazy ass body horror that had me looking away from the screen in places.
Oh, man. See, I'm not usually a body horror kind of guy. Like that kind of
Strap in, bucko.
It's why, I mean, like you and I have like the exact opposite interests in horror. I feel like it's so, it's so like it's both like obsession with horror, but the things we like are so opposite at the same time, except for we'll meet in the middle on like Late Night at the Devil. Does this
one
beat
of the best
that?
horror films of the year in terms of body horror?
Or just in general, like we've several times we've acted like teenagers rating horror movies of the year. So now that you've seen this one, how does this one stack up compared to your list for the year?
I don't know. I would probably watch Late Night with the Devil again before I watch this one again, but that's because it's easier to watch. The substance is rough in places.
Really?
Like it's, again, I'm not really a body horror guy. Like Society's great.
Yeah.
But my medical anxiety is such that like me and body horror don't typically get along. And some of the sound design in this is really visceral. Like there's a scene where a character is he's eating shellfish, and the way they turn up the volume on him, like ripping the heads off the shrimp and dunking them into the mayonnaise and super close up on the food and on the sauce. It's nauseating in a great way. I respect the shit out of it because they were trying to do that, but oh man, So I don't want to say one is better than the other, but Late Night with the Devil is like 40 minutes shorter, which is awesome. And maybe a little easier to watch.
Yeah.
I don't care. I could watch Demi Moore cleaning a window.
Oh, and again, she is so good in this, man. Like this is, if you told me this was a Kickstarter to like an entirely new act in her career, I'd believe you. She is so fucking good. And Margaret Qualley's good too, but Demi Moore just steals the show, especially, I won't ruin anything, but the makeup they put her in later, she does some brave shit. And when, oh no, I can't. I'll ruin it. There's too many great surprises.
Well, yeah. Look at it looks like you got Paul amped up though. He's like, yeah, Demi Moore.
You guys remember that scene in Evil Dead Rise where at the very end where the thing comes out and you're like, they're not going to do what I think they're going to do. And they do.
They did.
The end of this film is like that. Nope, that's it. That's all I'm going to say.
All right.
They're spoiling me here because Graham Norton's chat show comes back tomorrow night for his season run, and Demi Moore and Lady Gaga are on the show. So tomorrow evening I shall be in heaven with two of my favourite women in the world.
And he's not talking about this episode.
No.
Not talking about us, Brennan.
Were we recording a show? I've completely fucking forgotten. It's like, oh, we're just three friends talking about movies. Oh, right. No, this is all on the air. Okay.
But yes, right. Yeah. Watch Howling 2, and then when you've stopped crying, you can tell us all about it, Brandon. Settling. While my parents, Alan and Natasha, were often away working with their business, as they ran an import company for various antiques and fine wines for many years. Because it was difficult to travel with three youngest children, my siblings and I were often left in the care of our paternal grandparents. Papa Charlie and Gran Florence were great and spoiled us rotten when we stayed with them. They lived in a 120-year-old house in an upper-class area of Atlanta, Georgia. Grandpa had been left it by his late Uncle Stephen, who was a well-known eccentric. It was quite large, with 6 bedrooms, 4 full bathrooms, and a ballroom which we often used as a roller rink. The place was full of really weird works of art and very old furniture, but it was very, very comfortable. It did have heating and air conditioning for when the weather required it, and the baths with weird clawed feet that seemed big enough to be used as swimming pools, because I was 5 at the time. My siblings, twin sisters who were 9 and a 3-year-old brother, loved being there during the day. But at night it felt strange. The place echoed strangely. Papa used to tell us it was just the old house settling. We would have believed him if it was just sounds. The first thing I noticed was this shadow that would move around the hallway. It wasn't something you just saw gliding around on the wall like a common shadow. This thing looked like a solid mass of darkness. It was only in the hallway where we saw it, but it was at different times, but only at night. I tried to approach and talk to it, but it only moved away faster and disappeared into a painting on the wall, or maybe just the wall. It never said anything. It never gave off any feeling, good or bad. It just kind of came and went, but it sure was strange. Doors would open and shut. They were checked and rechecked for being badly fitted or having moved out of square due to their age. The locks were checked, the hinges were checked. Doors were taken down and rehinged and rehung. But they still kept opening. You wouldn't see it happen, and no one ever heard them open unless we'd personally opened them. They'd just be open. Then we'd close them. They'd stay shut for a while, and then they'd just open back up again. This only occurred with the internal doors. The front, back, and side doors didn't open unless we opened them ourselves. Another was the sound of a car with a big engine that was very loud and would drive up our long curved driveway. We'd hear it drive up to the door and then the engine turn off, and many times we'd go out to see who it was, but there was never anyone or any car there. A little while later it had just started up again, and we'd hear it drive away. Stranger still was the fact that the front gates weren't only shut, but locked tight and bolted, as it always was unless we went out. Certain nights we'd hear singing, which was a lady with a beautiful voice, and a well-played piano with music that sounded very old. 2 problems with this. Firstly, no one in the house knew the music that was being sung, let alone be able to sing it. Though many of us did play instruments, my mother was a great singer, but obviously she wasn't around when this would happen. And secondly, there wasn't a functioning piano in the house. We had an old piano in the basement, but it was all broken. All the wires inside was snapped by something we didn't know what, and many of the keys, sadly, were missing. And the piano sound came from the front lounge room, and the singing from the ballroom area, which we used for the roller skating, as our grandparents pretty didn't use it at all. Sadly, my grandparents have passed on since. My Uncle David and Aunt Deborah live in the house now with my cousins, and I rarely visit as my work really doesn't give me much time. Now and then, though, stories from my aunt and uncle and cousins filter down to me. Those ghosts, or whatever they are, still seem to be around.
I am a sucker for hearing the sound of instruments playing off in the distance. I think that is the creepiest thing in the world. I am such a sucker for you are like, all right, we could say, all right, those aren't really footsteps. It's just a pipe crew. It's an old house. But man, you start hearing a little something on the piano in the other room and there ain't no piano there. I'm a sucker for those stories.
And let's face it, that piano is probably playing Dixie, guys.
I wasn't going to go there, but you're right. Piano Man? Chopsticks. That would be horrifying. It's like Stairway to Heaven in the guitar store, They
seem frightfully nice ghosts there.
Yeah, although I do wonder about the one who pulls up in his spiritual hot rod. That seems douchebaggy and suspect.
That's quite unique, though. Really, you don't hear many stories about cars. Often people will talk about it being a horse-drawn car or carriage or something, rather than a motor car, as it were.
Well, I do wonder if we're going to hear more stuff like that, kind of as we go forward, right? Because I mean, technology just keeps on evolving, and are we going to hear more of like phantom cars taking the place of phantom carriages and things like this?
I think it only gets to the point, especially when it comes to cars. I think they only stand out if they are of a certain vintage, don't they? So you always see. I mean, like we were going somewhere the other week, and there was a car from, I don't know, late 70s, early 80s, and it sticks out like a sore thumb now because it just looks so odd. Whereas most cars are near enough the same thing. It's like if you look at some footage of a motorway or something 30 years ago, you notice all the cars are like all kinds of colours. Whereas these days, they're mostly like silver and white, red, black, blue, most of them. Whereas back in them days, you'd have like tangerine orange and diarrhea green and all kinds of... I mean, my parents, when I was growing up, had a car and it was horrendous. It was the ugliest colour. I don't know what colour it was. And it was that kind of car where if they said they were going to pick me up after school, I'd tell them to park around the corner so nobody could see it. It was awful.
I think there's a foolproof way to tell whether or not you're looking at a ghost car or a real car and driver. And it's the age of the driver. If you're watching a muscle car being driven by a guy in his 20s, that is a ghost. If there is an overweight man between his 50 and 75, that is probably a real person.
You know a lot about that man. Immediately judge that man. He looked outside and there was a Honda Accord. Like that never happens. The Plymouth minivan of doom. Oh man, what about PT Cruisers? Remember PT Cruisers? Those would make some good, like, I'm thinking Rob Zombie Dragula right now.
If any car is going to be a Dragula, a modern car, it's going to be the PT Cruiser.
PT Cruiser. Yeah.
But I'm fairly sure you don't see those anymore because they all went back to their home world.
That's Mandela effect. They never existed, actually. We all think that car did.
A killer train. I've always been super sensitive to spirits. All the women in my family are. I've been at a new job for about a month now. It's in a very old building that was a pharmacy beforehand, but has sat vacant for 10 years before the new business moved in. In the back room, there's dusty filing cabinets full of patient info dating back to the 50s. Seems weird.
Are they next to the toilet?
Underneath a weird chandelier? Yeah, it's a whole thing. Until today, I seriously thought a squatter lived in the back room. I'm usually the only person in the building, first one in and the last one out. I'd come into work alone and the door to said room would be open and the lights would be on, when I know full well that I'd shut the door and turn them off before locking up. I also never felt truly alone in the back room and tried to make my time spent there limited. There's a historic society in the town that dropped in today and we got to talking. Turns out in 1900, a mile away from where I work, there was a train crash. It's called the Camp Creek Crash. The train's engineer had stated beforehand, due to the heavy rain, we will be eating breakfast in Atlanta or in hell. That did not end the way he thought it would. The rain, which had been pouring down for 2 weeks, had made the river rise and eat away at the bridge supports. As the train crossed over the bridge, it collapsed. The train caught fire as it plummeted into the river. 39 of 49 passengers died. They dragged the bodies into the town square where I work for their families to try and identify them and collect them. Most of the bodies were charred beyond recognition, and 12 were left unclaimed and unidentified. As they were telling me this story, chills shot up and down my body, and I felt something squeeze my hand. Once they left, a wave of sadness crashed over me. I felt so alone and forgotten. Tears pricked at my eyes. No one else was inside except for me, so I called out to it. I told them that they were okay. There's people who remember and know what happened to them, even if we don't know their names. My knuckles felt squeezed together once again. I felt cold the rest of the day. I don't know if I'll feel them again, but I didn't feel scared. Apparently people hear a phantom train around the square too. And now I actually found an article that sort of expands on this. But Brandon, were you familiar, or either of you guys, were you familiar with the Camp Creek crash?
No, I was thinking about, there was one in North Carolina I covered that was almost this story, but no, I had no idea there was one in Atlanta too.
I read there was one in Alabama in 1993, I think. Wow. A train, a barge hit the bridge and knocked it just enough out of alignment that it would derail the train. There was not enough that they could notice something was wrong, but the tracks were just enough out of alignment that the train plunged into the river, which is another, huge casualty kind of deal. And I got to say, this is all pointing to worrisome stuff about the state of American infrastructure, Brandon. He says, thinking about his drive home.
Yes, I know. Yeah. There was, oh man, I was actually looking for another 2015. So by where I grew up in New Orleans, there's this tall bridge. It's called the Huey B. Long Bridge. And back in 2015, there was a train up there and the storm was so bad. And the wind took a train off of this bridge that was like, I was looking for the video. I was going to send it to you. Just severe storm. And this, it's probably 10 stories up is how tall this bridge would be. Just time and just some of these rail cars start falling off. That is scary. And actually you talk about the train problem, and was it John Oliver just did one of his things on the train problem in America and how bad it is, how much it's like ruining certain parts of certain rural counties and stuff, just getting stuck by these trains that are immensely long and no one is being safe about them.
Yeah, I took a couple trains down in the U.S. back in 2008. I went from Seattle to Chicago on the Empire Builder. And then I took the city of New Orleans down to New Orleans from Chicago. And I had a really great time, but I was talking to Sam, who's a listener of our show, and he worked for Amtrak for a long time, worked as a railroader. And he said all those services have really changed. He said you still get fed, but they don't have, it's more like airplane meals. You know, when I was on there, they actually had a chef cooking shit. And it was like really quite nice. I mean, you know, I had a roomette, so a very, you know, tiny little room, but you got to lay down. And the Empire Builder, I think, was 48 hours, something like that. And it was a really cool trip. But from what I understand, yeah, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And honestly, it's no better here in Canada. We, you know, to go across Canada by train is something rich people do. It's not something you do to travel.
Yeah.
It's a luxury experience.
I like traveling by train. I really enjoy it, but I always sit in the middle,
like between two people.
So if I'm on a train that's more than two carriages, I will always try sit in the middle. So whichever, if anything happens, I'm in the middle, which might eventually not work. But
is that fear? You're worried about something? What's the?
No, it's just balancing. I'm just spreading my bets. I'm just playing it step. It's not too bad here. I mean, I think the last train-related fatality we had here was about 4 years ago during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic. There was a landslip in Scotland and a train hit it and 3 people were tragically killed. So we haven't had a bad one for quite a long time in this country, which is quite surprising because our train network is so shit. It's amazing, really. There hasn't been a really bad one for, 20, 30 years in this country, thankfully.
Yeah.
And I think there's only been about half a dozen in the last 4 or 5 years, which is surprising.
Yeah, well, considering the number of trains you guys have, I guess those aren't too bad numbers. We're only about 11 years removed from, have you guys heard of Lac Mégantic?
Yes.
Yeah, that was rough. Are you familiar with that one, Brandon?
No, I haven't heard of that.
So that was there was a train was left unattended for some reason. I assume that's probably down to staffing issues. There's a huge problem with understaffing on Canada's railways, but an unattended train that had cars full of crude oil rolled downhill into the town of Lac Mégantic.
Oh my God.
And decimated 30 buildings.
Oh, I do remember that now.
Yeah, killed more than 40 people.
My God.
I think it's our 4th biggest train disaster. It was crazy stuff. Terrible tragedy.
Yeah. And completely avoidable.
Oh, as most of these disasters are. Yeah. Like I said, when I grew up in Revelstoke was a railway town. And that was where you made real money. You know, right up until the early 2000s. I remember a friend of mine at the time, he got a job working for the railroad and he was immediately looking at buying a house. It was just that kind of job. You could afford to do that back then. But over the years, the union has just ceded a lot of ground. And I'm not, obviously there's machinations involved in this. I'm not blaming anyone. I don't know enough about the situation, but yeah, it's not what it was. And a lot of folks are being worked pretty hard for a lot less than they used to get. But going back to the Camp Creek crash, I found that, as I mentioned, I found this article from the Crime Capsule website. And, I think this all gets a lot more palatable if we imagine that the train itself was murderous. Instead of there being like some kind of just terrible random tragedy like Mégantic, what if there was a train serial killer? And I think that's not a question we ask ourselves enough here on this show.
You're correct. We don't consider these possibilities enough, Brennan. Good point.
See, maybe if we did, we'd be higher up in the charts.
I'm more concerned about killer cars, like that man whose Capri was possessed.
Oh, which reminds me, we'll get back to, there's a thing that I watched recently I wanted to bring up with you, but we'll talk about killer trains first. So again, from the Crime Capsule website, did a killer train engine murder its passengers?
Yes.
I feel like that's exactly, yes, 100%. This is decided. So the article goes on to say, called the Camp Creek crash, this ghastly accident took the lives of nearly 40 souls. But who was responsible? Trains. No, that's not what it says. Remarkably, according to historian and Professor Jeffrey Wells, some speculation lies not on the men operating the train, but on the train itself. The only thing that can stop a bad guy with a train is a good guy with a train.
Oh.
Watch out for those level crossings.
Yeah. Brandon's like, oh man, I hitched myself to this guy. This is not good. Anyways, as the author goes on to say, we may jest about the dark and stormy aspect of that evening, but as Wells makes clear in his book, The Camp Creek Train Crash of 1900, in Atlanta or in Hell, for early American railroads, bad weather was deadly serious. That month, record rains had swollen all the waterways in and around McDonough, Georgia, a small town on the Southern Railway Company's line. When old engine number 7 stopped at the McDonough Depot on June 23rd on the way from Macon to Atlanta, its engineers were facing a blinding rainstorm and had no idea that the bridge ahead of them was already compromised. Examining newspaper accounts, survivor testimonies, eyewitness reports, and more, Wells reconstructs the events that led up to the disaster, particularly the way that rushing waters in the creek eroded the earthen bulwarks that held up the Camp Creek Bridge. With no more foundation to support it, the bridge buckled almost as soon as old engine number 7 crossed it, plunging directly into the raging floodwaters, resulting in the drowning, suffocation, and the burning alive of all but 10 or 11 of its passengers and crew. With visibility at zero thanks to the storm, there would have been no way at all to prevent it. But thanks to the heroism of crew member J.J. Quinlan and others who climbed out of the wreckage and raced to get help despite being injured, countless lives were saved. But, curiously, Wells notes while there was plenty of blame and litigation to go around regarding the maintenance of the bridge and culvert, questions also arose about the engine. Wells goes on to say, the engine was first put into service in 1888 by the Southern Railway Company. That year, the train claimed its first victims between the towns of Knoxville and Lenoir, Tennessee. Is that right, Brandon? Lenoir?
Maybe. Nobody pronounces the same thing within a 100-mile radius even around here. I don't know if you noticed, but,
Okay.
I mean, like, I've heard, like, we got Lafayette, we got Lafayette, we got, every different name you could possibly say. So, yeah, we'd have to ask them. I get emails about this stuff,
All right, we'll say Lenoir because I've already said it. It plowed into a farm wagon on the tracks and killed 3 people. 10 years later, in 1897, the same engine took another 9 lives when it hit a covered wagon, carrying members of a local family named Woodward near the city of Avondale, right outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Afterward, the engine was renumbered 851. The engine was sent to a different parish.
Oh, shit. It's even more upsetting after I was talking to Paul about nun porn.
Yep, there we go. None of that was recorded, but now everyone knows.
I don't remember that conversation.
Now we've thrown Brandon under the train.
We were talking about Immaculate, okay? We were talking about the horror movie and, and keep pretending. I was talking to a ghost of Paul.
Paul, you don't remember any of this, do you?
I was talking about the Care Bears movie.
Now there's some wholesome family entertainment. Paw Patrol.
Yeah, keep going. You're going to get sent to another parish, buddy.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Oh, this devolved.
Oh. All right, back to the murderous train. So after the train was sent to another parish, renamed 851, the new number did nothing to stop the death spree, for in 1898, the locomotive made its first dive into a river. According to reports in the Atlanta Constitution in July 1900, the rechristened locomotive crashed into a chasm over 60 feet and landed in the Etowah River. We're going to say Etowah. The freight cars attached to the engine caught fire and were destroyed, along with a great deal of freight. Not only did old number 7 have a habit of killing innocent bystanders, it also seemed to have a taste for the blood of its crew. Jesus Christ. The first engineer who drove the 846, John Ramsey, met an untimely demise when he was scalded to death in an accident stemming from his work on the engine. As if that were not enough, the second engineer, Abe Laird, died of typhoid fever during the summer of 1899, just 1 year prior to the accident at Camp Creek and 1 year after the wreck at the Etowah River. We're no experts, but this is either the unluckiest engine in the history of American rail, or there's something else going on. After all, some folks claim that McDonough is now haunted as a result. Wells' account goes into far more detail about the history of the area, the rail line, and the events of that night, and offers an unparalleled view into what many call George's Titanic. But until then, thank your own lucky stars for one thing. Should you happen to visit McDonough and see the old number 7 engine currently on display in Heritage Park, go ahead and breathe a great big sigh of relief. Until the train simply decides to up stakes and kill again.
Well, we've all seen Christine.
I was just thinking that. It is madness. This train has a thirst for blood.
Yeah, you don't often hear that kind of reputation attached to a train. There's several boats out there over the years that have been alleged to be cursed, that have like run aground or sunk and been refloated and saved and then sent out and carried on, like crashing into stuff. I mean, the Queen Mary's quite infamous. Even before it became a haunted attraction, in America. It was responsible for, I think, one of the largest losses of life during the Second World War when it ran over a troop-carrying ship.
I didn't know that.
I think off the coast of Ireland.
Oh, wow.
I went and visited a few months back. Went and did the Queen Mary.
Did you?
Yeah, 6 months ago. It was last spring, almost a year ago, I guess. Went and did did the ghost hunt tour and everything. Went down there and did it. Went on the underneath, and we did some of the Estes method and the bow of it and all that. It was fun, man. I get why it's a haunted attraction. It was cool.
It's lucky that it's even opened again. I know Craig Owens, when we had him on a couple of years ago, he was saying at the time it hadn't reopened after the pandemic, and there was some thought that it might not.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually stayed 2 nights there even. So we didn't even I was going early for I remember telling you about this, Brennan. I was going early to that conference in LA, and I told my girlfriend we were going to LA, and the first thing she said is like, "Oh, can we do the Queen Mary?" And I was like, I really just want to get this conference and get out. Like, I really don't, like, can you get to work or not? And she's like, no, if I pay for it, we're going, that was the deal, right? Like, she's like, I'm booking it and you're taking me. And we went, we stayed like 2 nights. It was beautiful though. I mean, it was a really nice, if you're going to go hang out in LA, go sit on the ship and look at the water, right? But we're talking about trains today,
100%.
not ships. So I digress.
Paul, just before we move on, aren't there stories associated with bits of, what's his name?
Flight 401.
Well, there's Flight 401, but I was thinking about the car. Was it Steve McQueen?
Or
James Dean?
Little Bastard.
Yeah.
James Dean's car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it killed lots of people. And so people thought that was possessed by something. Because I know one particular person who bought it, it fell off a stand and crushed him to death.
Yikes.
I think there's about 12 people have died after James Dean, in conjunction with owning it. So yeah, there are certain inanimate objects that we sometimes come across, cars, boats, trains, that people think, there's something not quite right with this, and it just doesn't seem, because at the end of the day, it's a mechanical entity. It should be, if there's any issues with it, it should be, you pull it apart, you rebuild it, it should be fine. They all come off the same production line. They're all made the same way. So why does one particular train end up having such a terrible reputation when it's probably not even travelling on the most dangerous train line in the country, is often one of the puzzling things. It's almost as if it has a death wish. It just seems to throw itself off the tracks sometimes.
Paul, if I learned anything from that documentary, The Mangler, I learned that a piece of machinery can be evil.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, there have been a few over the years. So I'm not surprised there's a train with a reputation like that either, because there's certainly been boats and cars with it. So,
all right, we're going to take a quick break for some ads, but while we do, remember, keep an ear out for a train whistle. You never know when it could be right outside your door.
The Face from the Lake. I went to visit my oldest friend over in Atlanta for her birthday. I stayed with her for about a week, and immediately when she picked me up at the airport, I felt like something was really off. It started at first with just a weird feeling. She had recently just moved into a new apartment, and when we got there, this feeling I had got worse because I felt like her entire apartment was just so heavy. I didn't actually see anything until about a few days later. We got up early in the morning and were getting ready to take a drive out to Lake Lanier to spend the morning. We were both in the bathroom doing our hair or something, and when I physically looked at her, I saw a pale, emotionless face of a woman next to her head, as if it was coming out of the wall next to her. I didn't see the face at all in the reflection of the mirror, only when I was physically looking at her. I froze up and just stared at it for a few seconds until whatever the hell it was disappeared. My friend asked me what was wrong, but I didn't tell her what I saw. I honestly thought maybe the light of her bathroom was casting a weird shadow on her wall somehow. Later that week, the feeling in her apartment got so much more horrible to the point where she mentioned something about it to me. She shared with me that when she moved into that apartment, she experienced for the very first time sleep paralysis, and that it was horrifying. After she told me what happened to her, I saw the face again that night when we were cooking dinner. Again, this pale, emotionless face next to my friend. The face would not recognize that I was looking at it, but this time I told my friend what I saw. She didn't really believe me, but this face continued to appear at random times throughout the night and well into the next morning. At midday the next day, I was honestly really scared and just wanted to get out of there. We ended up driving out to her mom's house. During the drive, we stopped at a restaurant to have a quick lunch, and we both went into the bathroom together. Well, guess what? The face was there again, and my friend finally saw it. We were both super freaked out and drove kind of really fast to her mom's house, and we told her what we experienced. Her mother was not sure if she believed what we told her, but she's very religious and managed to calm the both of us down. She wanted to do a prayer with us and bless us with some holy water that was given to her by her pastor. After that, I didn't see the face again for the rest of the time that I stayed with my friend. Their feeling in her apartment was still sort of weird, but not as horrible as before. I left Sunday, and when I called her the week after, she told me her mom had her pastor come over to her apartment and say some prayers. My friend never told me if she ever saw the face again, and I let it go because I didn't want to stir anything up. It was really strange for sure, and I think maybe something was in her apartment when she moved in and somehow got attached to her. She doesn't live in the apartment anymore, but she still sometimes has sleep paralysis, but I don't think it has anything to do with her experience in that apartment. Before we get into Lake Lanier, okay, all right, the camera's backwards. If you're watching this right now, no joke, this was not up there. I'm going to go, all right, that little bottle right there above my head on that shelf back there.
Yeah.
That's Lake Lanier water in there. So when I have on my bookshelf, I have all these random things from all these haunted places we've visited over the years, and a lot of stuff from, and of course we've gone down to Lake Lanier. And so at one point we just took a whole bunch of water from it and been put, and we have like a collection of it. So yeah, so I have a little Lake Lanier bottle. Anyway, no, Lake Lanier, I mean, I went down there a while back because obviously I've been obsessed with this story forever, Lake Lanier. And, we could go so deep into it, but I put out an episode back in like 2019. And, the basis of the story, to anybody that doesn't know, Lake Lanier, it is essentially it's a man-made lake. And what the government had to do is the Corps of Engineers, they dammed up the Chattahoochee River. They needed hydroelectric power and water for Atlanta. They were growing it. There's most of the lakes in Georgia and even Tennessee are man-made. They're man-made rivers that were dammed up, right? And so that's how they were getting power down there. And the story, there's a lot of different stuff that's going around now. And I'll tell you, when I first started getting into it, the story was that when they purchased all these farms, it was all farmland. The story was that they were moving cemeteries. They were moving bodies to relocate them to other cemeteries, okay? But they didn't move them all. And that was kind of, so it was cursed because of this. And that was the main story. And it was really interesting because, of course, at that point in time, it was like 600 recorded deaths on Lake Lanier. And it's the deadliest lake in the country. And you just hear about all these, every summer, 5-6 people will die on this lake. And so everybody believes it's cursed, and they believe it's cursed because this, this thing. And so we put out this story, and it's that, and it was kind of cheesy. And, Expedition X, that TV show with Josh Gates,
Yep.
They did a episode on it around that time as well. And they had divers go down because there's still structures that were there underneath it. And these divers went into the lake, and you could see the cemeteries or the headstones that were down there. And if you go visit around the lake, you can see these cemeteries. Even there's some of them have like little plaques, like these were moved. this section of this cemetery was moved from this other place. So it has this legacy of being cursed, and because of that, and when we put it out, that was that. But it's a unique story because the story surrounding why it's cursed has changed dramatically as more people find out about more of the history. And it's one of those kind of, I love talking about it because it's one of those legends that you can watch evolve in real time. You can see how media is playing into it and how it's changed because we covered it at this point when no one was talking about it. Every time a TV show did it, I'd get a phone call because we were like the only people who had covered this curse. Most of the people our age didn't grow up hearing the story. It was a much newer story. But as to Brennan's point, he wanted to bring it up, was one day we have this, of course, on YouTube, we have this Curse of Lake Lanier. It's the squiggly line, the podcast with the squiggly line. It's not, there's no video or anything, but I can't remember, somebody covers it. And it got to a point where every time someone would die on the lake, we would make $100 in ad revenue off YouTube. And it felt very uncomfortable because they would talk about the Curse of Lake Lanier. We were the only ones talking about it, right? And so people would go on YouTube looking up the curse, and then we would have 3,000 new views that day, like immediately after. But out of the blue, about a year or two later, all of a sudden I started getting these comments that we were whitewashing history and that that we were basically not telling the real story, and that there's all these racist that we were erasing genocide and things like that. Very, very heavy language accusing us of trying to cover up what really happened there. And we were kind of like caught off guard because that wasn't part of any of the stories and folklore we had read. And we didn't really dig too deep into the history. There were several towns that got bought out. Well, one of the towns that were down there was a town called Oscarville. And back almost 50 years, a little less than 50 years prior, Oscarville was the site of probably, unfortunately, a very typical sundown town, a very typical story in the South during that point in time, where it was a segregated town and there was a black community of farmers there. And one day a woman down there was raped. A white woman was raped, and they accused a black man of doing it. And the situation obviously just got very politically tense between the communities, and it grew and got very bad. And all of the white people went and ran every single black resident out of town. A very violent, even situation, some really, really escalated. And the result of that is that Forsyth County in Georgia was completely white. Up until, I believe, the 90s, it was completely segregated. It was continuing to live in a pre-civil rights era sort of mentality for years, decades to come. Refused, but it was kind of a small county. And so anyway, as a book came out called Blood at the Root that really kind of exposed that history, as it were. There was a lot of depth there with race. This is Georgia. So the lake then, as that was coming out, the lake then kind of took on this story as well. Well, why is it cursed? I mean, look at what happened there, right? How could it not be cursed, right? If that happened there as well. So now it's that. And I say that the role of media played in it because, of course, TV shows love finding angles. And even though that wasn't part of the original folklore, it starts getting talked about. And then Atlanta, the TV show, actually did something with it. And they leaned in to this racial violence history. Now, again, is it cursed? Is it not cursed? Is it because of this, that, or the other thing? I don't know, right? I do know I'm not going to go out on that fucking lake ever. I know that for sure. But you're not going to catch me there. But there's even the deeper thing. And then as you kind of move on, there's folks that talk about this was all native land. This was the home of the Cherokee. And if you go to Atlanta, you see all of this indigenous names everywhere that were run out with the Trail of Tears. And there are burial mounds under the water down there. So it has just this it's become such a unique story in that it's sprung up. It's so much American, everything that is kind of that haunted, dark history of the United States, background, whether it's native to race, all of that, all mixed up. And there's one thing under this lake. And, and we've watched it evolve over the last 6 years. It's been fascinating. So much so that even last week, I didn't even tell you about this, Brennan. Last week, I actually got on a call with a woman who has started doing ghost tours by boat on Lake Lanier, and had a chance to talk to her. And I was like, you can expect we will do more in the future. Southern Gothic's planning on doing a little more on the story and going a little deeper again, but I was talking to her and I was just like, how do you think this is a good idea? Like this sounds awful. This is, now, like, I guess you could not believe it's cursed and just say like, look, this is what y'all, let's be honest. This is Georgia. No offense, Atlantans, but that like hillbilly hold my beer stuff on a lake during the summer, like, let's be honest, like that probably, even if it's cursed, that's got to account for half of this shit. Okay.
Yeah.
I know my people and like, it's so like, but I talk about it a lot because it's one of these things that it is like the new Myrtle's plantation of haunted stories. It's like the new gem that's coming out, right? It's the new hot story that you're starting to see in TV shows, and it hasn't really firmed up all of the legend yet. It's not like set in stone, like something, like a Waverly Hills or like, or Queen Mary, or, it hasn't done that yet. So it's fascinating, the lake.
I'm intrigued by the fact that 40 miles away, you've got Lake Allatoona, is it? Which is a similar size.
Yeah.
And it gets the same amount of visitors, but it's got a third of the deaths.
Now, look, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of theories involved in it. Okay. So first of all, the lake itself, even with the visitors and everything else and the differences, the Lake Lanier was more of the recreational lake, if I understand it, for the area. And if you go there now, it is all boat houses. It's all these houses on there. It's, gotten upper middle class a lot and stuff like that around there. But you can look at the same time what's underneath the water and the currents. This is all man-made, right? So when you drive out there, it's almost eerie at the same time, because as you kind of drive around it and you're driving on these ridges or whatever, what you're seeing as land on the lake, this was all mountaintops essentially, because we flooded bottomland. And so, the dam, or the creepiest feeling that I got while I was there was actually going over to the dam and standing there, and you can see on one side of the dam, you got the river that's like 800 feet down from the top of the dam. And then you look over the dam and you're like almost at the water level, and realizing that if you look down, you have 800 feet deep in front of you, and it just looks like still lake on top. And like just that idea that you don't understand the vastness right here where you are is very creepy. And, of course there's stories, there's some good old hillbilly stories about giant catfish down there, that eat Volkswagen Beetles and stuff, we got all of them, but the lake being cursed, it is definitely become, one of the crown jewels of Southern storytelling right now.
Yeah. And that's not without probably even touching on the most famous resident ghost.
Yeah. The Lady of the Lake. Yeah.
I mean, that's a tragic story regardless of the ghost, Brandon.
Right.
Because the fact that these two women died, the whole evolving of what happened and how long it took to finally solve it. I still, when I look back, I find it incredible it took them 33 years to find the car. That just blows my mind.
Yeah. And, I all the specific numbers, I about a year ago, I had this story was kind of in my like live set when I did stuff at conferences and told ghost stories. So I'm a little fuzzy now. I haven't done the story in a year to know all the specifics. So I won't quote dates, but it was essentially right around the time after the lake was created. And it's Delia Mae Parker Young, and I cannot remember now the other name, but it was the two women. They went out and they went dancing that night. And look, it is dark out there today, and these are windy roads on again ridges. You're driving out there today; these are windy roads. It doesn't feel safe, and of course, they skidded off this bridge, and there was no sign of them whatsoever anywhere. And everybody, most people, like their kids actually thought that they just ran away, that they skipped out of town on them, and like there was a very chilly newspaper article where one of the kids thought, as an adult was like, well, we thought, mom just left, and there was a little bit more involved in what was going on. And, but of course, as Paul was saying, so they didn't know who they were. 2 years later, a fisherman's out there on the lake in the morning, and all of a sudden he finds a dead body of a woman. And the fisherman pulls her out, but she's so decomposed, they kind of suspect it's one of the women, but they have no ability whatsoever to prove this. And so, for years, the story was as if you go driving across this bridge, the Gainesville Bridge, you would come across this lady of the lake who's a woman wearing a blue dress, but the story was that as you get closer to her, this wasn't like a lady in white that was hitchhiking. Okay. As you got closer to her, you realize that like it's tattered clothes and that she doesn't have hands. Okay. And it just this like chilling image, and it looks like she's looking into the water. Right. And of course, divers go looking for the car, everything, right? And then eventually 20-something years later, they go to expand the bridge. And like Paul was saying, 33, I believe you said 33 years later, they're dredging it up. And sure enough, they find the car and the other woman is in the car. And they're able to identify it, everything. And by identifying that, they could identify this other woman and that was found, all these years before and buried as unknown in the cemetery. Only suspected. So like even the family, both families now had confirmation, even though one of them, but I, usually when I tell this story, I told the story at a convention, at the Haunted America convention. And I ended with this story because I say the lady in the lake is this thing that I want folks who listen to ghost stories to understand in this way of the humanity behind this one. And being careful when we tell ghost stories for it not to become trauma porn. Okay. Because when I went down there, and this happened in 55, somewhere late 50s, 55 to 58, somewhere around there. When I went down there, Heidi and I went to the cemetery to go and see where the women were. And I say she went with me because of course my girlfriend, me being the cemetery nerd, I couldn't find one of the headstones and she found it. So she was so proud, right? Like she beat me, right? Well, I couldn't find one of the headstones. We end up wandering around the cemetery for about an hour and it's starting to rain and everything. And finally we find the headstone and like we go to walk up to it. And again, this was 55, 58, right? She had a small child at that point. Walk up to it. And on the headstone was this little trinket that said, "I love you, Mom," on the headstone. And it was just, now this would have been an old man. I know he passed away not too long ago, based on, newspaper articles and all, so it was probably sitting there for a while. But it was such a huge reminder of for years, if this man like could have heard stories about this ghost, about this lady in blue, and this is his mom. Right. Everyone on the, we've seen it. TV shows have covered everything, so I always find that experience really taught me, as we talk about stories and all, when we look at a paranormal thing versus a ghost story, and then are we exploiting it? And as we talk about Lake Lanier, that's 600 real lives, 600 plus real lives that have been lost on there. And as crazy as the curse is, those are people.
Well, it's become a question of morality quite recently in the paranormal community, because there are people these days that look for the latest tragedy to chase it,
Right.
and just turn up at sites of murders, of serious crimes where serial killers have hung out, and they don't work on that principle. They don't give a shit about anybody else involved apart from them. All that matters to them is what they're doing, and they don't care about the victims' families. They don't care about the relatives that are still hanging around. They don't care about the trauma. And it's one of those questions you think, well, how long is it an acceptable length of time that you can morally go somewhere without guilt coming on you? And like you said, that's a perfect example, Brand, because these kids will have heard all kinds of stories about their mums. Not only the fact, the ghost stories, but what happened to them, where they went, why they went. You know, I'm sure they would have had all kinds of character assassinations about them, as often happens. And so to basically not know what happened to your mum for 33 years, and then the fact that they eventually find the card that proves who was who.
Yeah.
And the lady in the lake, I think, is it Susie Roberts?
That's the name.
She was the one
Susie.
Wearing the blue dress.
I believe.
Was it Susie Roberts?
I can't remember which one's which
so.
now. I feel bad.
Yeah. But Susie was the friend who wasn't driving the car.
Okay.
And she was the one that wasn't found in. But like you said, because she was so decomposed, they didn't know who was who, and they didn't know what they were wearing.
Yeah.
And so those relatives, those children will have heard these stories, and especially from 1990. And you look at how it is now. Like you say, the story is, because when people say that the story of the lady, not many mention the fact that she's got no hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if it seems to be one of those key aspects of the story that's dropped off over the last few years, ironically. But that's one of those things that also makes it stand out a bit more, because seeing a ghost with a disfigurement to the limbs is quite odd in general. You'll usually see people might have a head wound, a body wound or something, or they'll be covered in blood, but they don't usually have limbs or hands or feet missing. And so it's a darker story, really, that's entrenched in a tragic true event. And like you say, when you go to that grave and you see something like that, you can't help but be moved and realise that, yes, we all love the supernatural, but sometimes we're talking about real people and real lives who are still with us.
Yeah, the true crime community is going through a lot of this right now. They've been doing a lot of people have been having a really big open discussion about how to effectively, do true crime podcasts, do these documentaries. I know with some of the stuff Netflix is doing, they got hit pretty hard. But yeah, with the paranormal, we're in the middle. It's look, the thing that horrifies me more than anything was the story down in New Orleans, the Katrina story. I cannot remember their names for the one. You know what I'm talking about? I know people right now. It's on the tip of my tongue. But the guy who ate his girlfriend, the cannibal in the French Quarter after Katrina. Your eyes just lit up, Brennan. Have you not heard this one?
This is a new one on me.
It was after Katrina. Yeah. So everything was shut down. They're sitting there for, a few weeks or whatever, without character assassination. Pretty sure they were high as shit. And, they were kind of, and yeah. And I don't know if she died or he killed her. I don't know I don't remember. I can't give all the details.
But he ended up eating.
Yeah. And so there's a museum down there that I will not name because I don't want you to go to it, that has the fucking oven in the museum. And it just feels so like fresh and new. And, and there's stories like this, New Orleans sometimes can be particularly bad because this is another one that really bothers me that is from the Katrina era that I've seen newspaper articles where the parents were upset because it was on the ghost tour, and like the parents had to endure it. So, whether or not there's a reckoning with that in our community or not, it's certainly something that, you want to watch out for. Does it mean that it's not haunted at the same time? Right. So like does it mean that, that you're not, that woman wasn't really out there trying to draw attention? You have that part of the story, but then you have the part of the story where you're exploiting it, exploiting this tragedy. I don't know where the line is. I don't know where any of those things are, but it does feel icky on one end, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I remember going to the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum shortly after it opened in 2018, I think it was. And one of the things that always stuck with me was it Ed Gein's Cauldron? Is it he's got there?
Yeah.
Something like that. And it's obviously like prime placement, it's sort of a place of honor. But even the the Museum of Death in Los Angeles, which I think is a really, interesting experience and worth visiting. But like serial killer art, what's the morality there?
Well, Baggins has got serial killer art as well, hasn't he?
Yeah. Do you own a clown painting?
He does.
Do you own a Gacy clown painting? Like, is that, I have a friend who has one in his museum. Obviously I'm lost for words. I'm actually really stumbling over the fact that there's no sentence as Brennan ever uttered more that I've lost respect for him than I went to the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum.
And I've said a lot of sentences. My mea culpa there is, or my excuse rather, is I was visiting Shannon LeGros. It was the first time we met in person, and she said, "Hey, we should go check out this museum." And we used to talk bad shit about Baggins on this show because, when you start this kind of stuff, people on TV, they don't exist, right? They're on another plane. But then you especially in the paranormal, we've kind of talked about this ourselves with the horror community, Paul, like how quite small it is. And so I remember being in that museum, and he was apparently upstairs in the office, and the guide was like, "Yeah, he might come down, he might come say hi." And I remember thinking, I've been talking shit about this guy nonstop for a year and a half. And like, of course, who cares, right? We're a tiny podcast, but still, I've been talking mad shit about this guy. And now he's right there. And then years later, or a couple of years later, this lady got in touch with us, very nice lady. And she was like, "Hey, I had some questions, looking for some information. Just so you know, full disclosure, I'm the producer on a fairly popular TV show about the paranormal." And I said, "What?" And so we kind of talked. I gave her the information she needed. And she said, "Well, let me shout out your show to my audience on Facebook." And I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." I said, "What show do you work for?" And she said, "Ghost Adventures." Well, look, I should tell you, full disclosure, that in an earlier version of this show, we were not very kind to your show. So just heads up. Again, that's not something we've done in recent years, but there was a period when being negative was very fun and funny, and your show kind of deserved it. She was very sweet. She was like, "Well, we'll still shout you out. I don't really care." But
Brennan's moved on to bullying Danny Robbins.
Who's Danny Robbins? What am I missing? It's a long story.
It's a very long story. We're gonna go to an ad break, and we will explain it to you while our listeners are sold trampolines or whatever happens in these ads. Missing time. I'm an artist living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I paint ceiling murals for a restaurant group, traveling to different locations around the United States. I paint scripts of full books on ceilings for this restaurant group. It's pretty cool. My wife and I were in Atlanta, Georgia back in early 2016. She read to me, I wrote. We worked at night, usually got to the job around 6:30 p.m. I think this would have been the second or third week of May. We got coffee, went in through the side door, and talked until the last construction worker left. I started working around 7:45 p.m. I set up the ladder and had to prime a wall section above the bar area. 3-inch brush, a gallon of flat beige color paint, and a 9-inch roller setup. I started cutting the wall in and working for no more than 20 minutes. My wife said she was going to change into different clothes in our van in the parking deck. I worked for another 4 to 5 minutes and put my brush down on top of the paint bucket. I got down from the ladder to smoke a cigarette, and then all of a sudden, I woke up laying on one of the bench seats across the restaurant. My last memory was looking back up at my wall as I stepped off the ladder. The lights in the place were all flashing in succession with each other. I was scared, like a scary movie. I didn't see my wife. I looked at my phone. 2.5 hours had gone by. I called for her, called on the phone, but no answer. I immediately went to the parking garage, got to our van, and she was just waking up in the back of it. This is not like us. We just don't fall asleep out of nowhere, at the same time, no less. And we had been used to the work all night, sleep all day schedule since February. She had looked at her phone and freaked out due to how long she'd been asleep. She also didn't remember falling asleep, same as me. On the way back up to the job, I explained to her about the lights flashing, and we talked to the security guard who reset/turned them off for us. He said someone had tripped the security alarm, but was oblivious to what could have done it. The alarm system wasn't turned on because of the construction workers. We also used the back door a lot and never set any alarm off. Either way, it just happened at the same time. But the scariest thing was when I saw my paintbrush on top of the paint can on top of the ladder. The brush was still wet. Flat latex paint dries up a brush in less than 2 hours in an air-conditioned environment. I put that brush down at almost 8 p.m. It was 10:45 p.m. when I picked it up again. The timeline for that brush was somehow 5 to 10 minutes, whereas for my wife and I, it was nearly 3 hours. Explain that to me. And I got to say, Paul, I do love a missing time story. I've said this before. It's probably one of the only paranormal phenomenon that really frightened me. Like, again, having just finished, actually, the last chapter I recorded for Strange Audio was the chapter about missing time. It's just kind of how the process worked out. And I'll never forget, I started writing that one in Denver Airport way back. And I finished it in Victoria, sitting at my desk, and I felt like I was being watched. And it was, I mean, maybe it was just self-suggestion, I don't know, but it was the only time writing that book that I felt unnerved. I actually had to go outside and wait for traffic to feel grounded again, just to feel like I wasn't alone. Because all of a sudden I just became very aware that I was by myself. And so that was our last story for tonight. But now we're going to talk a little bit about Fear Daily.
So you're on the cusp of this hitting the airwaves, chaps. It's an intriguing collaboration. I must admit, I was extremely excited when I heard about it, as two people who I respect as much as you two, regardless of how you treat me off air. And
waiting for the punchline.
And I just want to know.
Yeah.
So I was just intrigued what the genesis was. I mean, obviously you are two gents who are immersed in paranormal and history and weird subjects in general. Was it something that you've always kind of wanted to work on, either together or in your own individual sort of lanes, as it were? And so this is really sort of the culmination of both an exciting friendship, but also a wonderful working partnership.
I've always wanted to write fiction. I do some writing for Ghost Story Guys, but mostly we use found stories. So we'll, either me, Luke, or Brody will find stories and I'll touch them up and kind of, I'm more of a curator here in a lot of ways than I am a writer. But I've wanted to write stuff for a long time. It's just, I'm so, the way my brain works, if I don't have an external deadline, nothing gets done. Proof of this is the fact that the audiobook for Strange is finally being finished 3 years after I started it. Or 2 years after I started it. But during the pandemic, I started writing some stuff, and I was actually started writing a fiction novel, trying to write in early 2019 before my cousin got sick. And that kind of just destabilized me. I kind of lost the habit. But I wrote about 5,000-6,000 words of a book back then. And then when Brandon came to me with, I guess it was December of last year?
Yeah, it would have been right. Yeah, sometime. Yeah, it was as soon as the Halloween season hangover went away, I was like, start something new. Let's go. That's where it was.
Yeah.
So it was probably end of December, early January. Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of morphed from a daily ghost story show into far more work because we're both incapable of just making the lowest common denominator thing.
Yeah. I think the original idea was, because you have amassed so many stories, was to essentially make another podcast that was kind of like what Ghost Story Guys is, except without, the personality to it. It was just going to be the stories and just kind of feed just really basically just the reading of the story and have it come out every day, and just a really basic thing. I hadn't planned on fiction per se. I didn't, or when I came, I wasn't thinking fiction. It was kind of like a general concept at the same time. And, I knew Brennan would be able to, bring a different layer. I knew I couldn't do that, put it that way, whatever it became. But yeah, man, it's interesting how it did. It blew up to something different, and then it got scaled back down, and then it got changed over and then moved around in circles. And, what you hear is certainly a couple iterations later of what we really intended to do. I'm pretty proud of it, though, I think.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely.
Ask me in 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that.
Yeah.
I suppose when you're having to create so many fresh fictional takes in the paranormal genre, is it something that you've both had an input in regards to the topics you cover, or is it things that you've been influenced by, or are they situations and stories that you've always wanted to touch and perhaps you've never been able to find something that's sated that desire to be scared in such a way?
Well, for me, I mean, the show is essentially, the idea is that it's fiction, as we said. It's 2 stories every day, Monday to Friday. But the sort of the overarching setup is that these are stories which were, allegedly true life stories submitted to an old bulletin board server. And if we have anyone in our audience who's old enough, they're going to remember bulletin boards. It was sort of like an early precursor to the internet.
Yes.
You would dial in with your modem and you would sort of trade messages with other people about sports or movies or whatever.
It was Reddit for people with beepers.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Reddit for people with beepers.
Yes.
And so the premise is that this was like a bulletin board that was just for the paranormal stories, for people's like real life encounters with the paranormal. So the whole thing was kind of meant to be structured to read a lot like Reddit posts at first.
Mm-hmm.
And so mostly, again, at the beginning, I had this crazy ass idea that because it was a daily show and we were kind of originally looking at starting in like March or April, I thought, I'll tie the stories to real life events. So I'll go through newspapers and weave each day. So like Monday, March 1st, this car accident happened that day. So in like a certain place. I quickly realized that is an insane, it's just not possible. It's insane. That's a stupid idea. But it's kind of allowed me to explore a lot of stuff that I didn't realize interested me. Brandon and I were talking about this recently. We did an interview with Adam on Weekly Creep. And I kind of realized like a lot of these stories are kind of my memories of the 90s in a lot of way, or kind of real paranormal experiences in some ways filtered through this sort of working class sensibility of the 90s. So a lot of the stories are like, the characters are 7-Eleven clerks or little kids kind of who have very like maybe, or it happened when they were little. They have a very narrow understanding of the world, or, a lot of the people are not very educated, and I think that was just kind of that was my experience of growing up. I grew up in, as you know, a little mill town, right? So a lot of people have spent life on the road. There's one of our consulting editor, Joey. She has helped me kind of like, she's helping us structure the scheduling, things like this. And when she has kind of read all the stories as I've gone, and she's like, man, a lot of these are really depressing. These are really, you've written some sad stories. Like they're good, but they're really sad. And I kind of like, yeah, that's true. Cause I have an obsession with missing people, cause I've known a lot of people who've gone missing. I kind of have an obsession with missing time, with kind of the darkness of that period. Cause we're in that place now where we've got like 90s nostalgia has kind of replaced 80s nostalgia. So people remember the Junko jeans and the Backstreet Boys and all that shit, which is fine. Those are cool parts of that time. But, and, because the economy, like, as people joke, you could afford to have a secret family back then, so the economy was better.
Yes.
But at the same time, that was a really dark time too, because we were, like latchkey kids, right? That was a thing. We were on our own a lot. And I don't want to, like, I think the whole Gen X rise thing is kind of sad, but there is some truth to it in that, like, there was a lot of self-parenting that went on back then, and a lot of bad shit happened in the margins, right? Like there's a book called The 90s. It's a collection of essays by Chuck Klosterman. And it's one of the many things I've read kind of researching this. But he made a great point, man. And I've kind of forgot this, is like the 90s were the last time you weren't expected to know everything, right? So there was a lot of mystery. There was a lot of, because you couldn't just go look something up on the internet. If you didn't know it, if there wasn't a library around, maybe you'd ask someone you knew. If you were a kid, you'd ask someone you knew. But depending on where you lived, they might be really dumb. So maybe you're going to get a bullshit answer. Maybe you're going to get a lie, some half truth. I kind of wanted to play in that sandbox too, right? That's sort of, not everyone knows everything, right? Like you're alone. There's no, in some of the stories there are cell phones, because obviously cell phones are becoming more of a thing, but not much. And so it seemed like a really cool sandbox to play in, this very scary time, or potentially very scary time, when you could really be on your own, right? And also because my memory of the 90s is that there was a lot of like stuff left over from the 70s and 80s that were kind of hanging over you. So stuff like Vietnam, especially in America, right? Like, that was still very much part of the American consciousness at that time. There's a story we did called Night Hunting, which actually Brandon really killed. He always kills the production on all of them, but that one especially. And that kind of starts with a dad who's come back from the war and who had changed. And I think that was a really common experience. So like, there's never really been like, we will talk about this or we won't talk about that. There was one story that we pulled because everyone in the chain, well, from the time I wrote it to the time like Joey, our consulting editor, read it, to the time Brandon recorded it, and then our editor Rachel got to it, everyone was like, no, this is gross. This cannot go out. And there's only been one. So I'd say that's the only time there's been something that we're like, nope.
And you can now hear that on our Supercast. No, I'm just kidding. $4.99, you can hear the story that went too far. It has been incredible. Brennan has thought this through in such depth of what the stories are. And it's interesting because, what a lot of people don't experience or see in writers or podcasters or creatives or anything is the fact that, you have to write a lot to get good. It's more, it's not about writing something perfect the first time. And this particular project and seeing what he wrote, as he was joking about, is one of the first ones, but the first couple versus the 100th, the drastic difference in ability to write at this scope and this many, because we have 2 stories coming out a day. So every day, a listener is going to hear 2 stories. And, we've mixed up, some of the stuff that's come out over the, that he's written over the last 6 months. And so they have different vibes and don't quite feel the same. But man, I gotta give it to you. I mean, you have covered a lot of ground that I didn't expect. It's gone in a lot of different ways. And it was very apparent reading them, watching the evolution, being able to watch somebody that you work with, get better at their craft along the way. And I'll bro you up that way after giving you hell earlier. It's like, it actually, like, honestly, I mean, it's felt like, how do you meet someone in the middle and get better as well? Because, you got to do the story justice too. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to, obviously voice it to make it come to life. And, that's one thing. And that's something that, like you obviously evolve as well. But, when it comes to the sound design, sometimes that's tricky because you just want to get the fuck out of the way and you don't want to make stuff, you want to make something sound cool and you want to have this production that bolsters it. But then, you'll end up with a really good story and you're like, oh shit. This doesn't need all the sound effects. This is just fucking creepy because, Brennan has broken somehow and we get to benefit from that.
I mean, some of the stuff that people will hear, like, you're definitely going to recognize certain themes or even certain events, obviously because I've been doing this for so long. So there are cases where I'll take like a story from the show that we've told here, but I'll remix it, so it's I'll keep some of the same events. Again, people might recognize certain things and then kind of cast them in new light, but I've been reading so much this year, like not as much in terms of volume as I had been, but like books about Major League Baseball, all kinds of shit. I've been buying old I've talked on the show to folks about like buying pamphlets and stuff and like being in vintage shops. And that's what I'm doing. I'm buying old magazines, old letters, postcards, pamphlets, like shit that's hyper regional information from that period that you can't find online. Right. So like there's a story, one of the stories, I can't remember what it's called, might be Clouds or something, but it's a father-son story about a weird experience that they have on the way back from a car show. And that car show was put on by the California Highway Patrol in, I think, Venice Beach in 1990 something. And if you look online, that information is not online. I got every bit of information about that car show comes from a hot rod magazine I picked up in a vintage shop. So once you kind of start doing that shit, that's where I kind of find like you can start connecting what are kind of tropey things in some cases. Because, you know, we have to do, by the time we're done with it, we're going to be like 530 of these fucking things, right? So some of them are going to be better than others. But I think even with the stories that are not the greatest, I think if you can connect them to something that's real in a way that resonates for people, I think it just gives it a weight that otherwise it wouldn't have. If you just cook up a story, like, that's fine. You know, you remix someone's Reddit story, pull out a couple events, you know, kind of change it, like completely rewrite it, obviously, but like keep certain themes. You can do that. But I think if you then can try to tie it into like the first female firefighter in Paramus, New Jersey, you know, and kind of like make it adjacent to that, I just think it gives a story a legitimacy, not a legitimacy, but like like I said, like a weight that it wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, so it's got a tether to reality, and that elevates it then, because you can find that information, and therefore the question is, where does the truth end and the story start? Where is the line blurred? And I suppose you made a really good point there when you were talking about growing up, and we all thought everybody was fine because people didn't talk about things, and we didn't have social media, and so you've no idea what your best friend's having for dinner every day unless he tells you. Whereas we seem to have gravitated where dark things always seem to happen behind closed doors 30, 40 years ago, even 25 years ago. Whereas these days, everybody shows this wonderful social media version of themselves. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Look at where I am. Look at where we are. Look at who I'm with. Look at my beautiful muscles. And it's basically the modern version of that kind of growing up attitude, that people are now presenting a public persona, but we've no idea what goes on behind it. And so we can see it, but we still don't know anything. Whereas before we couldn't see it and we didn't know anything. Now we can see it, but it doesn't mean we know any more than we did 40 years ago. So even though you might think that the environment and the driving force is perhaps rooted in childhood experiences, anybody can see it every day just by logging on. We can all see that friend who never shuts up about how wonderful their life is, or these beautiful people on this beautiful island or whatever. But if we know those people, we know the story behind it. And I think often when we find something out or we see something, we want to know, is that really all there is going on?
Yeah, and that's why the 90s was such a perfect time to set it, because like I said, it was just at that cusp where we didn't know all that shit. There was still a lot of room for mystery, and there's still mystery now, but I think because of the proliferation of like phone cameras and just everyone's all on the internet all the fucking time, there is this sense that, oh, there's no mystery left. There's tons of fucking mystery left, but it's the perception of it, right? And so the 90s, you know, there's so much mystery. There's so much space there for there to be something happening behind closed doors. And it's just been a really great place for us to kind of explore these questions and these themes that, again, I think would be harder to do now. Because again, you say now, well, they got a phone, or that's not how things work anymore, you know? And I mean, it might be, you don't know that, but because you have this perception that you know everything because you've got access to what appears to be the entirety of human knowledge. But it's that kind of thing where, well, no, the entirety of human knowledge is still not online. It's not. A fraction of human knowledge is online. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of play in that great unknown, you know, and kind of just see what sort of shadows are out there. Because some of the things in the stories are real. That's kind of the thing. Like some of the shit is real. Like one of the stories I wrote, I don't mind saying it, at the very beginning, was a story called Gas. And Gas is a fictionalization of something that really happened. There was a handful of cases in and around Central California, or southern sort of, I don't even know what the fuck you'd call it, around Bakersfield and that sort of area. But they were poisonings. These people went to the emergency rooms. They were opened up and noxious gas poured out of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like to the point where they had to evacuate the emergency room and bring in a hazmat team.
Yeah. That
happened 3 or 4 times that I'm aware of. And I don't know, they said it was pesticide, but they never explained how any of these people ingested the same pesticide. It just kind of was left. And so that's an example. Like that's been caught up in the machine now. We take that story, kind of weave something around it, but there's truth there. And I think that's one of the cool things about fiction, is I'm finding at least, is like you can use fiction to explore things to explore greater truths. I guess like Brennan, that's what writing is. But not having really written much fiction before, this is kind of new to me.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that always struck me about Max Brooks's Zombie Survival Guide, is that wonderful list at the end where he's got a list of historical events that he says, well, actually, these were all zombie outbreaks. And
Right.
the governments have covered it all up. And so you think it's a war, you think it's a train crash, you think a bomb's gone off. But it's not. So he gives you the real story, but then he tells you what actually happened. And I love that kind of playing in the margins of reality, like you say, where you can bend it and twist it, because as long as you've got that fulcrum of truth, that grain of a location or a job or an event or a time or a location, you can set it there. And then, like Lego, you can build anything. Once you've got the foundation down, the sky's the limit.
Yeah. And then for like, what's exciting for me is to then see Brandon kind of build on that, to sort of take the structure and then just to see kind of like what he builds around it with audio. And it's a really wondrous thing. Like, again, the production on these is just surpassingly incredible. I like making shit with audio, but when I listen to what Brandon does, I'm like, whoa, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
He's a wizard.
He truly is.
I actually did sell my soul to the devil. So this is going to be a hit show. And the next time you see Brennan, he will be driving a Porsche. Because, yeah, no. Yeah,
hope it's a red one.
Yeah. We'll make that joke. Okay. Anyway, no, I think what's really fun about it at the end of the day, when you listen to it, it's, the way Brennan's done it is it is on the cusp of, you don't, the idea is you don't really feel like it's fiction, I mean, that's the hope. With the time period, one of the things, we were talking about earlier, at this point, was, these are people this is like the first generation that's connecting the dots too. With it being a bulletin board, these characters are people who've, we get now, you can go on Reddit and you can connect with all these weirdos just like us. But, these stories are from people that this is, like, oh, I get to tell you the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. And other people are going to read this. You didn't have that before, right? You didn't have that before, that kind of internet connectivity. And, and so, having that level of, like we said, we said it earlier, this was the generation that didn't have to know everything. And that comes through. I think that's been a really impactful part of the storytelling, the way you've shown that. It feels real, and other ones, it feels fantastic, right? It's been fun to like perform them from the perspective of whatever weird place it's come from. I don't know, man. It's
Canada is pretty odd.
It's just really, the whole project has been like this kind of, this kind of dark therapy, if you will, of like, get your demons out in this project with one of your friends. And, like, how do we put all the negative emotions in something that turns out really kind of hopefully beautiful in a way? And, and it's not that, the thing's not that dark. My 10-year-old is, my 10-year-old does not listen to Fear Daily, but, my 10-year-old obviously grew up with a dad who tells ghost stories for a living, right? And, he grew up in a house where there's Lake Lanier water on the, on there, like on that, the bookshelf behind me, right? And skulls and and so my 10-year-old is, is kind of in this place where she really enjoys watching like ghost TV shows and things like that. And I had to tell her, you can't listen to fear. Like, some of this stuff will get you. You can't, like, you can listen to Southern Gothic. I try and keep it in that realm of PG-13, but there's some stuff that there's some dark things that come out. And like we said earlier, we had to can one of them because it did get a little too dark. And so if anybody's around, maybe check on Brennan every once in a while, knock on the door, see what, make sure, we get him out for a little bit, but, it's good stuff. It's been a blast. Yeah.
He's been all right since I put the implant in him last year, Brendan. So I've already got eyes on him.
Can you control him with an app? Keep him in line with an app?
Not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I'll tell you, honestly though, I might've had the genesis of the project in its earliest form, but, Brennan it's really the character and the soul of it has become Brennan, and more than anything when it comes to the story. So it's definitely, it's me trying to keep up with the stories get evolving more than anything, because I don't know if the sound design is going to evolve anymore. You guys are stuck with this funky voice. You're stuck with the way this sounds now, and it's if it improves, it's all him, not me. Yeah.
it's been really great so far. And again, if there's anywhere to be stuck, this is the place. So I am very excited for Fear to be out there with our audience now. And folks, I appreciate you indulging us as we shill our new show to you again. We're very excited about it. So go subscribe to Fear Daily. Make our October a merry one. And we are going to wrap it up there. Brandon, thanks so much, man. I know we've kept you 45 minutes later than we said we would. So thank you for your patience and not just throwing the laptop against the wall in frustration.
What are you talking about? I'm going to come bomb next week. Now that I have the link to your studio, when I start getting FOMO next week, I'm just going to come and I'm going to get the live stream unedited. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to eat my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And,
Good. You should join us for our. You should join us on for our end of October show, Brendan.
Oh gosh, yeah, where we all have like giant bags under our eyes. Finally made it through the spooky season. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank y'all for having me, though. I always have a blast hanging out with y'all. Yeah.
Always a pleasure to spend time in your company, sir.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. Thanks as always to the great Brandon Scheck-Snyder for joining us on this episode. Don't forget to check out Fear Daily on podcast platforms everywhere. I will be annoying the shit out of you all about Fear Daily for the next 100 years. So get used to it. I refuse to write this much and not talk about it fucking constantly. It's been really hard not to, as I said earlier. So, yes.
You've released it all now, and that's it. You can't keep it in.
That's it. That's it. There's a dozen things that I was thinking of right now as similes for that or metaphors, and no, let's just move on. And of course, you can find Brandon over at Southern Gothic, as we mentioned at the end of the last segment, and that's at southerngothicmedia.com, and of course on all the major podcast platforms. As for the Ghost Story Guys, we are Luke Greensmith, who helped find the stories for this episode. He is also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community. She's also co-host of the Streaming Into Madness podcast with Walter Whitaker. Brody Daniels, who helps find our stories. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community.
Our paranormal conductor is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And my friend and co-host is the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
This week, I'm delighted to welcome back Tobias Wayland from the Singular Fortean Society as we dive into his appearance on Unsolved Mysteries and the fact that he got 38 million emails in about 3 days after it was aired from everybody in the world, especially in Brazil, it would seem, who are very interested in the Chicago Mothman. So it's nice to have a chat with Tobias about that and how it all came about and how he's been dealing with the ramifications of that and some of the cases featured in it. And then the following week, I welcome back a trio of incredible researchers, David Weatherly, Kevin Lee Nelson, and Chad Lewis, as we dive into backroads lore and some strange stories about Halloween-related Fortean phenomena.
Hell yes. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media networks, apart from one, and across our website, which is mysteriesandmonsters.com.
I'm largely the truth on, pretty much all the same social media platforms. And you can find my podcast, Fear Daily. Did I mention Fear Daily, Paul? Has that come up yet on this episode?
What is Fear Daily?
Whoa, well, let me tell you. It's the best fucking podcast on the internet. Just in case you're sleeping through the rest of the episode. It is a daily horror fiction podcast. 2 stories a day, 5 days a week. Spooky stories, some of which are maybe even a little bit true, but you'll never know which. You'd have to torture it out of me or pay me a lot of money. I'm open to either, really. All right. And again, you find that at feardaily.com or everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, we could not do this without our subscribers, our Patreon, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. However you support the show, we appreciate it a great deal. And if you want to join our community of very, very cool people, click the link in the show notes or head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Or you can sign up to GSG Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. And possibly a fourth option that will eventually replace one of those because it's getting complicated.
Nobody said the future was going to be this difficult.
I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you. I never thought it would be easy, but I didn't think I'd be spending this much time going back and forth between subscriber platforms.
Yes, it feels like the beginnings of a great 80s song.
I melt with you. The greatest 80s song, which we've covered. Oh, no. Paul's connection's fallen out. He's gone. He's gone. We can't hear him anymore. Go fuck yourself. You're on.
It's not even in the top 1,000. But anyway, you carry on living that lie.
Kids, go to bed. Mom and Dad are going to fight.
Well, we're not. We're just going to carry on until you realise I'm right.
It's an Irish relationship. We will never talk about what's wrong. We just wait for one or the other to die.
Marriage.
Welcome. But yes, I forget what the fuck I was talking about. Right, Patreon. Yeah. Patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts. And again, we appreciate it very, very much. Paul, my friend, do you have any spots coming up?
Not at the moment. I've got a couple lined up. I'm just waiting for dates to be confirmed.
Very cool.
But I will be wandering around Pontefract next month at the Parameet.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think by the time this comes out, it'll be this month.
Yes, this month even. Woo,
very cool.
Future.
Don't forget to find Paul at Pontefract at Parameet. Give him a big old hug. Buy him a glass of white wine, and see what magic comes of it.
White wine is only my failsafe when the beer selection's crap.
Oh, I mean, is it likely to be good at Pontefract?
It can't be any worse than it was last year. God, Bennett.
Yeah, I remember drinking a bunch of Guinness, but I was doing that for a while anyways.
Yeah, you tend to forget things after that.
You're not kidding, my friend. You're not kidding. All right. I was recently on Weekly Creep with Brandon, and we've got a few other spots coming up talking about Fear Daily. Have I mentioned, Paul, that I have a new podcast called Fear Daily? Has that come up yet?
No. Wow.
Oh, shit. Well, tell you what, for episode 199, we'll just talk about that exclusively.
Wow. Bet the listeners can't wait for that.
Oh, I bet they can't. All right. If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. You'll find all kinds of cool stuff. T-shirts, stickers, mugs, all kinds of cool stuff. And again, that's ghoststoryguys.com. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes. All other music on this show is provided courtesy of Epidemic Sound. And I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then...
Have I mentioned I have a show called Fear Daily? I actually saw them live once, and it was not a great show.
I hated them. I was so glad Prince sued them to death.
Why'd he sue them?
I think it was their biggest hit, and they used a Prince sample on it, and they hadn't licensed it, so he basically bankrupted them and their label.
Oof. Get the license for this shit, guys. Like, I know that was kind of in its infancy at the time, but figure that shit out.
Especially with Prince.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Young man, your arms are not long enough to box with God.
Not in the early 90s.
No.
Every time somebody talks about Prince now, all I think about is him playing basketball and that whole thing. Like I can't ever picture Prince anymore as the artist that he was. Now it's him playing basketball in his like Purple Rain outfit or something. Right at the end, last line. Sorry, Brennan.
That's right. You be sorry. You apologize, motherfucker.
Her only complaint had been. This is gonna take like 20 times now. We're just
We're gonna deep fake his voice.
You can do that in Riverside now.
Not for the
Riverside,
guest, just for the host.
Oh, really?
It's a very malevolent line, isn't it?
If I could do it for guests, I'd just have everyone's voice saying, Bren, you are so great.
I love you, Brennan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. I can't be trusted with that kind of power.
All right. Quick, Paul. Who the fuck is Danny?
I've had Pat Benatar's We Belong Together stuck in my head for ages.
Fuck
Anyways,
you.
this is,
Oh, man.
I love a bit of Pat. See, there's a good 80s song, Brennan. Much better than that one you keep banging on about.
no, you're wrong about that. I love you, but you're wrong about that one. Brandon, you got to back me up here. I Melt With You by Modern English, the greatest 80s song of all time.
I mean, I don't know what the greatest 80s song of all times is. I'd have to sit and probably meditate on that for a little
It's
while.
not that.
But
Incorrect.
I
Wrong.
do.
And Brandon has to go.
I do.
Brandon died on the way back to his home planet.
You've been Delta Force is coming.
That's right. Yep. The Green Berets are done with your Sasquatch bullshit. And I do love a good missing time. Where the fuck did he go?
Paul's missing.
Apparently, Paul's missing
Did we
time.
scare him off? Did he?
There he is.
I got really excited that I was going to get to be the new co-host to the Ghost Story guys.
Sorry, I ran out of drink about half an hour ago and I was dying.
Oh, no worries. It was just funny. I finished the missing time story and I
and he's
closed the window. I was like, where the fuck did he's missing?